Take a look at this. This is the final, brutal moment of a story that completely scandalized Rome and has fascinated people for centuries. A young woman's head held up for a horrified crowd. She was executed for killing her own father. But to really understand how she ended up on that scaffold, to get why the people of Rome saw a saint where the law saw a sinner, we have to go back. We have to understand the monster she killed and the world that created them both.
Today, we are diving deep into one of history's most infamous and tragic cases, a story of unbelievable cruelty and of desperate rebellion. This is the tragedy of Beatrice Cenci, a saint forged in sin.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll meet the villain, Francesco Cenci, a man literally called Rome's incarnate devil. Then, we'll descend into his daughter's unendurable captivity. From there, we'll follow the desperate patricide plot and see how a confession was brutalized out of her in A Saint on the Rack. And finally, we'll arrive at the legend of the scaffold, the day a criminal was transformed into a martyr.
Okay, let's set the scene. We're in late 16th century Rome. And to understand the monster at the very heart of this story, you first have to understand the corrupt, violent world that he came from.
You know, this was a city where power and religion were tangled up in the most toxic way imaginable. The shadow of the Borgias was still long, and the line between a sinner and a saint, well, it often just depended on how much money you had. So Francesco Cenci wasn't some kind of freak anomaly. He was the perfect product of a sick system. He was born into one of Rome's richest families, and he learned very, very early that his money was basically a get-out-of-jail-free card. In a city where the papacy was always desperate for cash, justice was always up for sale.
The historical record, it paints a chilling picture of just how evil this man was. He was a known atheist who would go to church just to shout blasphemies. 3 separate times he was thrown in prison for crimes so awful people would only whisper about them. And each time he paid a fortune, 100,000 piastres, straight to the Pope's treasury and just walked free. He sent his own sons to Spain with no money, openly telling people he hoped they'd starve to death. And when 2 of his other sons were murdered back in Rome, he threw a massive party to celebrate. His only regret? That the killers hadn't gotten all of them. This wasn't just cruelty. It was a deep, unnatural hatred for his own flesh and blood.
And if you need any more proof of just how cold this guy was, get this. While he was having a private chapel built, he was talking to the architect about the family burial vault. Looking at the plans, Francesco just laughed and said, "That's where I hope to put them all." He actually took pleasure in the thought of his entire family being dead. He didn't see children, he saw annoyances he wanted to get rid of.
And that brings us to the central victim of this reign of terror, his youngest daughter, Beatrice.
At just 13, Beatrice was everything her father hated. She was beautiful, gentle, innocent. And it seems like he saved his worst, most twisted cruelty just for her. He locked her away in a remote wing of the family palace, turning her own home into a prison. He was her only jailer, bringing her food himself, making sure she was completely cut off from the entire world.
But here's the thing, Beatrice didn't just lie down and take it. She fought back with the only weapons she had. She begged her relatives for help, but they were all terrified of her father. She and her stepmother, Lucrezia, they risked everything to smuggle a secret letter to the Pope himself, Pope Clement VIII. It was a desperate plea detailing all the abuse and begging to be sent to a convent, anywhere to get away. But Francesco's money and his influence were everywhere. The letter? It just disappeared. Every single door she tried to open was slammed shut in her face, leaving her totally and completely alone with him.
And then, the abuse escalated into the absolute worst nightmare imaginable. A nobleman, a man named Abbe Guerrara, had seen Beatrice and fallen in love with her. He formally asked Francesco for her hand in marriage. Francesco's answer wasn't just no. It was a horrifying public confession. With this wicked smile, he said, "She is my mistress." He wasn't just admitting to incest, he was bragging about it. He was using his own daughter's violation as a display of his total power. For Beatrice and her family, that was it. That was the moment all hope of a legal or peaceful way out just died.
After that public degradation and the private horror that it confirmed, the family saw only one path left. They decided they had to commit a crime to stop a much, much greater one. So one night, the final line was crossed. Francesco went to his daughter's room and, as the records say, forced her by violence to do his bidding. This monstrous act was the final catalyst. A completely shattered Beatrice went to her stepmother and her brother, Giacomo, and told them what happened.
All their years of shared suffering just crystallized into one single, unshakable thought. The monster had to die.
All right, so here's how it all went down on the night of September 9th, 1598. Lucretia drugged Francesco's wine with opium. Around midnight, two hired killers creep into his bedroom. But as they're standing over the old man sleeping, his white hair kind of glowing in the moonlight, their nerve just breaks. They back out, shaking, saying they can't kill a man who looks so peaceful. And it's right then, the young girl who'd been a prisoner just hours before steps up and takes command. This is the moment Beatrice completely transforms. Seeing these two grown men falter, she doesn't panic. She scoffs at them with a fury that could only be born from years of torment. "So you men," she says, her voice just dripping with contempt, "are afraid to kill an old man in his sleep? How would it be, pray, if he were awake? I will kill my father myself." Her righteous anger, this terrifying resolve from a victim with absolutely nothing left to lose, it shamed the men back into action. The abused daughter had just become an avenging angel.
So they went back into the room. One of them put a long nail to Francesco's eye and hammered it straight into his brain. They hammered another one through his throat. The man who had terrorized his family for decades was finally and brutally silenced. They dragged his body out to a balcony and threw it down onto a tree below, trying to make it look like an accident. And for one short, fleeting moment, they must have thought they were free.
Yeah, that freedom didn't last long. The authorities were suspicious, an investigation started, and pretty soon, the Cenci family found themselves facing a system of justice that was every bit as cruel as the man they had just killed. Now, Beatrice's brothers and her stepmother, they broke pretty quickly under torture. But Beatrice, she had this almost superhuman will. She denied everything, so the frustrated court ordered the extraordinary torture of the cord. It's a fiendishly simple device. Your hands are tied behind your back, a rope is slung over a pulley, and you're just hoisted into the air. The full weight of your body rips your shoulders right out of their sockets. It's an agony designed to break anyone.
We actually have records from the Vatican court preserving her cries. As her body was stretched and broken, she was screaming in agony, fainting from the pain, only for them to splash her with cold water to wake her up and question her again. And yet, through all of that, she refused to confess. She maintained her innocence with a force of will that just stunned her tormentors, enduring pain that had broken hardened soldiers.
So if they couldn't break her body, the judges decided to break her spirit. They brought her family, who had already confessed, into the torture chamber. Her brother Giacomo, his own body just mangled, saw her hanging there and he pleaded with her to just stop. "We committed the crime," he begged her. "Now you must repent and save your soul. Do not invite this frightful torture." So now she had this impossible choice: stick to the truth and watch her family suffer more, or confess and condemn them all.
And this, right here, this is the moment that cemented her legend. Hanging from that rope, her arms twisted and bloodied, she looked at the agonized faces of her family. And it wasn't the physical pain that finally broke her. It was her love for them. Seeing them suffer was a torment far greater than anything the executioners could dream up. So for them, she gave in. She agreed to confess to the crime she had so bravely denied. It was her final act of sacrifice for her family.
With a full confession in hand, the trial was just a formality. And despite this huge outpouring of public support, pleas for mercy coming from all over Rome, the Pope condemned the family to death. The final act was about to begin. Exactly 1 year and 2 days after the murder, on a blistering hot September morning, the family was led to the scaffold. The people of Rome crammed into the square, but they weren't there to see murderers punished. They were there to mourn victims who had finally fought back. Beatrice, only 16 years old, watched the block with a calm and a dignity that just silenced the entire crowd. Her face was reportedly serene, as if she were going to her own wedding, not her death. As the executioner came near, she spoke her last words. It wasn't a plea for mercy, and it wasn't a confession of guilt. It was a prayer. A calm declaration of her faith in a justice that existed beyond the corrupt world that had condemned her. This wasn't the plea of a guilty woman. This was the prayer of a martyr, calmly meeting her fate. And then she laid her head on the block. The people of Rome saw her as a saint almost immediately. Poets and painters would make her immortal, a symbol of innocence crushed by tyranny. It's a legend that's still with us today, and it leaves us with the really tough question at the heart of her tragedy. When every door is locked, when the law is protecting the monster instead of the victim, and the only justice you can find is at the end of a blade, what's left?
Was what she did an unforgivable sin, or was it the only form of justice, the only path to salvation that she had left?